In this video we're going to embrace the rain, we're going to get dry, then we're going to get incredibly cozy, and then we're going to embrace the rain again. After an unusually dry spell of weather for the UK, I've secretly been crying out for a bit of rain, for three reasons really. Firstly, to help ease the wildfires that have been popping up left, right and centre. Secondly, to see just how well this cheap and quite small tarp and poncho hybrid will keep me and my kit dry in these conditions. By the way, the answer to that is fair play, it did a really good job. And thirdly, I wanted to see just how quickly and effectively I could keep myself dry if it suddenly started raining while I was out and about and all I had was a tarp in my backpack. The answer, of course, is very quickly and effectively, so I also fetched the bivvy bag and the sleeping bag and everything else with me. Two things to note on my shelter building here. This is definitely not the optimal condition. Really soft ground, knee-high grass that's been soaked for a couple of days of heavy rain, and because my new walking poles haven't arrived after I gave my previous ones back to the friend that I'd borrowed them off for the last 3 years or so, I had to use these garden canes, which of course they're spindly, they're not very solid, so let's just accept at face value that this is not an ideal setup between the ground conditions, the grass length, and the materials for the shelter. But that's a far more realistic and authentic experience than finding a perfectly manicured lawn in the middle of a hillside or wilderness. Just for the sake of my ego here, I'm just going to put a few seconds of my random shelter tutorial video up here because I promise I can actually build decent shelters. Anyway, back to the video. After walking around in all this soaking wet knee-high grass, you can imagine my trousers are an absolute write-off. I can actually take the bottom parts off because these are convertible, so that's worked out well. However, let's see what the top half of me is like. Perfectly dry. And you know what? The world suddenly sounds a lot quieter now I've taken this off. Anyway, that looks like a very wet floor under there. I wonder if we can solve that. This is a good little example of how useful one of these little poncho tarps is. So the outer side is of course already wet, and using that face down we've got instantly a dry floor space in our little shelter. You can see here I'm getting rid of those wet bottom half of the trousers too, so now I've got just slightly damp shorts. Before we get the bivvy and sleeping bag set up, let's take stock for a second. So we've gone from being out wading through wet grass and being rained on wearing a poncho to inside a nicely sized waterproof shelter that I can also feel myself warming up because I'm out of that slight breeze as well. And that's taken us, 2 to 3 minutes? And that's in what I'd consider bad ground conditions, really long soaking wet grass, trying to look at the camera every 2 seconds to make sure I hadn't wandered out of shot while I was setting up, and using really smooth, thin, feeble garden poles rather than decent sticks from the surroundings, or of course what I always have when I'm out and about, my proper trekking poles. So in those circumstances it's still taken us a couple of minutes to get set up in a nice waterproof area. And moving away from the practical side for just 1 second, even though I am maybe 10 to 20 minutes away from being able to run and get in a nice warm car and get to a nice warm dry house, even knowing that, just being in here now, especially with that increasing pitter-patter of the rain on the tarp, feels so comfy, feels so sheltered and cosy, and it just feels good, even though I know I can get to a proper shelter and not have to worry about packing up and getting soaked again. So if I was on the side of a hill or a mountain somewhere and it had just started raining and I quickly did this setup, I can imagine how much more satisfied and cosy and just overall dry and safe I would feel. Man, this is brilliant. Anyway, bivvy and sleeping bag, let's go. I just want to draw attention to how pleasant this little setup experience was. Having created what's basically a 3-metre long dry tunnel, you can imagine setting up the bivvy bag. This was my fancy bivvy bag, the Alpkit Elan with the hoop at the top. It's just great. I'm totally out of the elements. It's hammering with rain outside and I'm wearing shorts, blowing up an inflatable mattress, listening to the calm, relaxing pitter-patter of rain on the tarp. So yeah, really enjoyed this. Great idea. I don't mean to get soppy here, but this is really nice. I think any time that you're safe and warm and toasty indoors and you can hear the rain and the elements going on outdoors, it gives you some sort of primal feeling of safety, coziness, shelter, I don't know, comfort in some very, very deep way. I mean, let's be fair, I'm literally in a sleeping bag. I couldn't get much cozier right now, and I couldn't get much closer to the elements either. So that's probably why I'm having such a great feeling now of almost euphoria. Well, that's been absolutely lovely. I'm probably going to enjoy this next part less. Why won't it stop raining? So of course, everything that I just said about it being a pleasant experience to set up all of my sleeping kit beneath a 3-metre long waterproof tunnel is also true for packing it all away. I'm not in a rush, I'm not getting hassled by the weather, and I'm able to put my waterproof clothes on underneath this without getting all of my underlayers wet in the process. I actually put my waterproof jacket and trousers on there because I forgot to get these shots with the poncho tarp down on the floor when I first set this up. So really, you should have seen these shots far earlier in the video to give you an overall context of the shelter, but this is real life, what are you gonna do? So the poncho tarp I'm using as the floor is roughly 2 meters long, whereas the outer tarp is 3 meters long. So that's got a rough overhang of 50 centimeters on each side, and you can see it's basically been kept entirely dry in these relatively still, non-windy conditions. I was caught out unexpectedly on a recent minimalist camping trip with nothing more than a bivvy bag, sleeping bag, and inflatable mattress. And I do think if I'd have just taken the extra 500 to 600 grams of weight of the tarp, a few cords and pegs, then I could have had an infinitely more pleasant experience, and of course not woken up already wet in the middle of the night in a rainstorm. But all in all, you live and you learn, and I'm glad that I tested this out in such unpleasant wet conditions because, well, firstly, I like to have that prior experience if I do find myself out and about in these conditions, actually needing to build this sort of stuff as a shelter. And secondly, I wanted to test this out just as the simplest of shelters, not get too clever for my own good and start creating unrealistic fancy setups that if it was windy would be really hard to set up. Just a simple A-frame, a simple tarp and a bivvy bag. And you know what? That was fantastic. I suppose what I'm really doing with these test setups is giving myself the confidence to know that if I go out and it starts to hammer down with rain and it's terrible and I'm miserable and getting soaked, I can just set something like this up and know that it's going to be effective, which makes me feel infinitely better about the various weather conditions I might be running into out and about in the first place. I hope that watching me play around with tarps in the rain has been somehow entertaining or educational. If you want to help me out, give the video a like and please do subscribe for more. If you really want to help me out, then please consider supporting via PayPal, channel membership, Facebook subscriptions, super thanks and so on, just like some of my recent supporters: Dogs, Rob, Kaz G, Kevin Y, Jackie A, George B, Fake W, Art V, L Hughes, Steve B, John B, Melissa L, Sean B, BL Beach, Dawn H, A Sanford, T Seymour and David D. Thank you very much everybody, I am incredibly grateful for any kind of support. Until the next time, keep it interesting, keep it tarp worthy, have a fantastic day and of course, farewell.